What's good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's going on with the overall market, what you should be watching for moving forward. I'm also going to break down the technicals that are looking for Tesla, SPY, Nvidia, the QQQ, and many tickers out there. I'm going to talk about what news just came out involving the banks and Target, and what you should be watching for today in terms of data and etc. But before I do anything like this, before I talk about what's going on with the overall market, let me just mention a couple of things. I'm firstly not a financial planner, so make sure you take none of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you are guaranteed up to 12 free stocks. The offer ends very soon. It ends today, so check it out before they run out. There are only about 20 hours left. But anyways, now let's talk about the market. How on earth are things looking? So in the pre-market, SPY is kind of red right now. So is the QQQ and Tesla and many of these different stocks. The market is continuing to weaken as we saw more and more talks about bank concerns yesterday, not to mention the things that happened in China. And this stuff is still affecting the market to this day. Now, later on today, don't forget we have the FOMC minutes that could affect the market big time and change directions, of course, but there are no guarantees just yet, as the best thing to do is to look at the current trend, which is still looking relatively weak. Now, 5 things to know about the market before we open. The first thing is that we already have a down day. The market's already relatively weak, especially after yesterday with all the Fitch warnings about potentially downgrading lots of banks such as Wells Fargo, Bank of America, and JP Morgan Chase. And then we also have, once again, those concerns about China as the economy is weakening over there and they were forced to cut rates. Now, when it comes to Target, we had some interesting stuff that came out for Target. Fortunately, Target actually beat on earnings. They did relatively well for this one in particular, but they ended up cutting their full year guidance, showing some weakness right here as they're talking about how things could change with the current economic conditions, and their guidance has weakened for the next year. And despite that, the stock price is still up, but once again, this is still something worth mentioning because the same thing happened to Home Depot. And we're going to see what happens to Walmart tomorrow going forward. So when it comes to bank concerns as well, we have Kashkari over here who was talking about the current situations. And he mentioned right now that things are not insanely horrible. He mentioned that there's still a lot of strength in the economy, but inflation is still a little bit too hot. And he mentioned that there is still work to be done by the Fed. He tended to be kind of like in the middle, a little bit more hawkish actually with some of his claims. But besides that, it wasn't really that crazy. He didn't say anything out of the ordinary or anything like that. And besides that, that's pretty much it. That's really significant that I'm going to be talking about. And then don't forget about Target slashing their full year forecast as once again retailers struggle to win over thrifty shoppers. There is truth behind that. And that is something that's happening. It's becoming like a norm right now for many of these companies. Some of the biggest movers right now are like Target and Tesla right now, which is down quite a bit after the news that came out involving China. We're continuing to see the same thing with Coinbase. It's actually up quite a bit. We actually had some good news involving regulations right now that came out, and so far it's just worth mentioning. Now, when it comes to earnings, don't forget, so we have Target that came out today. TJ Maxx is still reporting, and then we're going to be watching Walmart for tomorrow. It's going to be a big one. I'm going to be very, very concerned about their guidance if anything does end up going down, and the current trend is not looking that great once I show you guys the chart later on. And then as for data for today, I just wanted to mention that we have some industrial data, housing data, and all that coming out early on, but nothing too crazy. I don't think it's going to be that impactful for the markets, not like anything too crazy compared to FOMC. The minutes come out at 2 o'clock p.m., so that's when things are going to go wild. Until then, the market may not be that insane, but I just want to mention that SPY is still looking relatively weak. We're still continuing to see the market slow down. Tesla's also looking quite weak after it slashed its prices. This is still affecting it, and the overall stock price is looking weaker by the minutes. So looking at SPY right now, we're actually sitting at support at 442. This was where the gap support happened to be, and this is also a historical support. Let me just pull up the SPY chart before I talk more about Tesla and the others. So on SPY, we're basically going to be watching 442. It needs to hold 442. That's going to be our key level. If that ends up breaking, hypothetically, if we do end up getting some kind of break below that support, we're going to be watching this thing come down to where this overall level is right here on its falling wedge, and that's going to take it all the way down to about 441.5 or so. I could see that the very low 441s would be the next level because we have this falling wedge, right? And we're actually not at the bottom of it, so there is still some room for downside if we continue dropping, right? And even if we could still be respecting the falling wedge and drop lower than where we currently are. So you're going to be watching 442 as the key level of the day. If that breaks, you're going to be watching 441.3 443-ish, and this could always break down even lower. There have been instances where we broke lower or even above the wedge just a little bit. So I wouldn't rule out the possibility that if 441.3 or so ends up breaking this very low 441 area, depending on the timing that we touch it on the falling wedge, if this breaks, we could see 440, and then like the 438 area is also another possibility. Those are some important supports to remember. For resistance, okay, for resistance, you're going to be watching 443.35 and then 444 flat. That's going to be a key resistance because that was previous support. And then above that, once again, we have this other important level around 445.5. So watch all these levels very, very carefully, but we are looking more bearish for the time being. And we're going to be watching how support holds. I also want to add this about Tesla before I talk about the more micro levels on the other stocks. But when it comes to Tesla, it's also looking relatively weak. We actually broke below our support at 230. We talked about this yesterday. If we broke 230, we're going to be watching 225 as the next key level on Tesla. And you can see right about here, it actually broke below its the current falling wedge I had drawn out. It actually became relatively weak. So now we have this next level right here. I drew out another like blue trend line from the previous area, and that's going to be the support for Tesla. But remember, these trend lines can always break as the chart gets weaker and weaker. That is natural. That happens. It's nothing out of the ordinary. So right now we're watching 225 as major support on Tesla. And for resistance, watch 228, 230. And then above 230, we have 232.5, then 235 above that. But you're going to be watching 225 as support on Tesla. If that breaks, we could see this thing sink even lower to much lower levels. 221 becomes a real possibility. Then we have like 217, 215, and those much lower levels if it continues to sink down. But support's going to be kind of decent at 225, so we're going to be seeing how this ends up holding. All right. But anyways, now let's talk about the charts. Let's talk about some other levels. What do I see playing out for SPY? So for now, it's looking relatively weak. Still looks weak in the pre-market. We're going to be watching how it responds to 442. If it breaks 441.3, that area I just talked about earlier is going to be tested. There's 440, 438, and then lower levels like that. If it bounces off this 442 level, you're going to be watching 443.35 as resistance, and above that, 444 becomes a real possibility. But I don't expect anything too crazy. I don't expect the market to shoot up too much. It's going to likely start off a little bit weak, maybe get a rebound, and then just trade sideways around this area, be very, very weak in like range trade. That's what I'm basically seeing at this point. Range trading, which is what I talked about yesterday before we get the FOMC minutes at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern time, then we're going to see a much bigger move, and everything could change depending on that. We could see the market bounce, or the market may continue to tank. It all depends on the minutes. For Tesla, still not looking too good. In my opinion, it's still looking relatively weak. Like I said before, 225 is going to be the key support. If that breaks, Tesla could drop even lower, down to about 221, then potentially 220. For now, it actually hit 227, and then 225 is going to be the next support. It may test 225. It's still looking very, very weak on this trend. It just, continued to drop for the entire pre-market. There wasn't even much of a bounce. So we're going to be watching these next support zones after the price cuts that came in China. All right. Now, if it were to bounce, let's just say Tesla tries to actually bounce here. 230 is going to be your resistance. The 20 EMA at 230.5. Then we have 233 and 235 above for resistance. Now, it's looking weak right now. Like if you look at the chart, it's just downtrending. There's no sign of any bounce just yet as of right now. So we're going to be watching to see how it responds to these levels by the time we open. But I just want to note it's looking very, very weak. Aapl is also not looking that great. Last time I checked, at least. I just wanted to mention that looking at the chart, it's approaching 177 as support. This breaks. There's 176.5 coming next. And looking at the trend that I was talking about yesterday, this was looking like a head and shoulders. So I think it may test 176.5 and try to bounce off that. Not like a big bounce, just a little rebound when some buyers step in around there. So I think 176.5 may be tested for Aapl and may sink the market a little bit lower before this thing tries to like base. So watch that level very carefully on Aapl if it does end up breaking down. Then 178 is going to be our resistance. I think it's going to come down to 176.5 for now. Maybe try to bounce a little bit. And then if it breaks below that, 174 becomes a real possibility, but it has to break 176.5 first. Then we could start breaking down to lower levels. But for now, just watch 176.5, see how it responds. We might see some buyers step in for the time being, and then we're going to see what happens after the FOMC minutes. If the minutes are like, going to cause more bearish price action, Aapl could then sink to like 175, 174, and beyond that. Or if the minutes cause a bounce, Aapl can make its way back up to 178 to 180. It all depends on them. For the triple Q, the same thing. I wanted to mention about the triple Q is that it had a very, very similar structure as Apple. I'm expecting it to come down to about 364.69. We're going to see if it could bounce or like try to base around here for the time being, then range trade around there in the mid 365s. And then we're going to be watching to see what happens after that, because the FOMC minutes are going to affect it big time. So watch for a little bit more dropping to come. It could drop another. This is about $1 of a drop, 164.69. Sideways price action after that. Market is still looking a little bit weaker. And then we have Nvidia coming next. How is Nvidia looking? This thing is currently actually up in the pre-market by about 0.91%. So far, it's trying to hold up, but my only concern about it would be the fact that the whole market, if it does cool off more, this is going to drag Nvidia down just a little bit. We're currently holding above our 50 EMA at about 440, and it's trying to hold up for the time being. If it breaks below the 50 EMA, expect it to come all the way down to 436 or so. And if that fails us, it could come down a little bit lower, but it has some relative strength trying to hold up for the time being. It's getting very tight right now, right? It's getting very, very tight, so expect a bigger move to come later on. If it does try to break out to the upside of good news, you're going to be watching resistance currently around the really major resistance is going to be around 452. Then above that, we have like 455 and then 460. Those are possibilities, but my only concern is about how the whole market is moving and how this thing could be impacted. So just watch support and resistance to see which way it ends up breaking once we get the breakout. We're very tight right now, and we will see which way it ends up breaking and which direction. So those are some important levels on Nvidia. We're going to be watching to see which way it breaks. It's getting very tight, and watch support and resistance and be very, very patient with it. All right, the dollar is a little bit down right now. Nothing too crazy is happening. The VIX is up once again. We're going to be watching to see how this moves. Um, on the VIX, one of the things I wanted to mention is that on the 30 minutes time frame, there is still a valid head and shoulders that could be forming, but no guarantees about this because it should have already dropped, or you could argue it should have already dropped by now, but it still is technically valid, but it's just like a very extended right shoulder. Not really counting on it, but if this does end up breaking down to fill this gap down here to like 14, this could be because of the market bouncing. There's a possibility of that after the FOMC minutes. But hey, I don't want to like guess. I don't want to just be gambling in this market. We don't know what's going to happen. So the best thing to do is just read the chart and we will see if this gets to breakdown or not. We will be able to catch it in real time. That's the best way to look at it. Okay, anyways, that's what I have for this video. I want to keep this one nice and short. We can see SPY is trying to drop even harder. Watch your support levels and do what you have to do. And I'll most definitely see you guys in the next one. Tesla the market to the moon alongside SPY, Nvidia, and many others. And I'll see you guys very soon. Thank you and peace out.